once we say, how do we encounter you as the landscape and the location, we have to be actually spiritually scientific. We have to have a method and an order. And I'm going to try and give you a few indications. So here we are. I went to Brittany many years ago and saw inscriptions like this. And you might say, well, what is this? Is this a marker? Is it a wayfinder? Yes, in a way. But what is it trying to describe? And of course, we don't really know. But we can start to look at it and see that there's a beautiful vertical column in the middle. And there are some interesting rounded forms on left and right. And when I look at it and look at similar markings like that of this place, I go, but it's a map, I think. But it's not a map of the physical world. It's a map of another world. And it's a world, of course, that we don't have the clairaudient capacity, potentially, to be able to understand and make meaning of. But if we really look at these scribes, we also see that children do that in their early developmental process of drawings. They do orbiting movements. They do lattice works and structures. And they go through a very interesting kind of corollary of what ancient people have done with their markings, creating a sense of connection, separation, and place. So, look at it. 4,500 BC. Remarkable. Let's go on. So, I've been doing a bit of work in China, and I was very hesitant about doing a genus loci kind of workshop. And in reading a piece of research by Simon Riggs, who did a master's on the genus loci method of Ruskin Mill Trust, I found as part of my research something from Confucius, 500 BC. And I want to read it to you because it's astonishing. It's as if I've just had an encounter with Margaret Culkin, those many years ago, which I did in order to also refine my understanding of how to get into this process of finding a conscious sense of place. As Confucius reportedly said, no matter where you go, there you are. There you are in place. Only it could be argued that perhaps the most of the time we are not really there. Perhaps we are not really experience or become conscious of the place that we are in. Wow, 500 BC. And so maybe the Chinese have got something to teach me. And I was very, very worried. Well, guess what? The Chinese, unless you go to very specific people, have forgotten. And when I started opening up this conversation about the kind of feng shui, they said, no, that's something else. Yeah. I said, but isn't it connected? No, not really. But what about the wonderful kind of prior knowledge you seem to have about understanding the power of place? They said, yes, but we've forgotten it. Tell us what you do in the West. A little bit more of the story. Next one. So, there is a challenge. If you read the poem on the left from Hildegard of Bingen, it's a cosmological picture of the universe, the stars. And she and the universe are co-creative in the process of creating an environmental understanding of nature. So powerful was this verse that she wrote that when the Pope got hold of it, he was after her head. And you can say, well, why was he after her head? Because she saw herself as a co-creator of a new cosmology. She could read it inside and out, and he didn't like it. How can you become an observer of the creative process and start co-creating it? Well, that was the kind of divine wisdom that lived in some of the remarkable people of the 13th, 12th century. And then we have something really challenging, which we are suffering from. In fact, we can say, this is why this factory was built here. And what Francis Bacon did is to give us a new legitimacy to defile nature and place. What he said, effectively, was that if you stop thinking and feeling that there's anything sacred in the world, you will own a new power as a masculine birth to reshape the world. It's called our contemporary scientific paradigm. And his brother was a chancellor, and he had all the money in England that was necessary, and a whole university movement was set up. And you could say, we're not even at the end of this process. GM is part of it, vivisection's part of it, it goes on and on and on. But we're also at this crossing point where, well, do we really start now completely changing the face of the natural world? Because we have that power. But he gave us the authority to do it, because he said it's HO2. It's SiO2. It's not God-laden. It's not God-imbued. It's not sacred. Nature was to be bound into service and made a slave and put into constraint. The red is his language. Okay? It's actually quite shocking. She was to be dissected, freed out of her natural state and squeezed and molded. Human power and knowledge meet as one. He wrote of a new science as a masculine birth that will issue in a blessed race of heroes and supermen. And every GCSE curriculum in science, biology, whatever it is based on that principle. And we're trying to do biodynamics. And when I want to put an advert in a local gardening magazine for a BD gardener, I'm told, "Oh, Mr. Gordon, no, we don't do those kind of adverts." I go, "What do you mean?" "Well, it's a not evidence-based method, BD. You can't do it. We won't have your advert." And I go, "Ooh, that's tricky. So how long can we do BD practice before the thought police give us no?" It's much closer than I think we think. In fact, so close that I'm having a meeting in due course to talk with the BD colleagues about whether we shouldn't actually be much more precise about where we locate the biodynamic preparations in Ruskin Male Trust. Can we really use public money for a non-evidence-based method? Yes, but let's put it into the land trust. So I have no illusions about the fact that the reality police are on our backs. They just haven't knocked at the door yet. So I'll leave you to think about that. Let's go on. So the great news, however, is that there's a kind of tsunami of new experience, of very skillful insights, and David White is one, in that there's a kind of re-emergence, a rebirth of the power of understanding locality, place. We might think of ourselves as each like a created geography, a confluence of inherited flows. Each one of us has a unique signature, inherited from our ancestors, our landscape, our language. Underneath it, half-hidden geology of existence, memories, hurts, triumph, and stories in lineage that have yet to be fully told. You know, I think that's so beautiful. So the poets and the writers are there already. We need to go to them to unravel what it is they're able to give us deep, immersive understanding about the power of place and memory. Let's go on. And of course, the master of all is Goethe. Because actually, I don't think there was anyone before Goethe who could have looked outside and inside at the same time. It's very clear why Rudolf Steiner based his whole spiritual scientific perspective from, because he could actually do this, what psychology calls the depressive position. He could be inside and out and yet conscious. Very powerful. And in a way, we could say, well, do we need to carry on with the talk? Because what did he say? Is not is not nature already in the heart of man? Well, so there is a macro cosmetician. He can see the part in the whole and the whole in the part. And he uses the heart as a method by which we enter a situation. Now, he will do it in the plant, he will do it in other situations. And of course, if you're in a Waldorf school or in Ruskin Mill Trust, we do something similar to this heartfelt basis of understanding our students. It's called the child study, the student study. We sit in a circle and we enter into a dialogue in which we try and find the pain of that situation in that human being. And we've got a skill set of people who say, I'm hearing something. I can change my opinion about what I thought it was because I'm hearing the same term 3, 4, 5 times. And so we create this insight between ourselves and a situation. Ruskin practiced this with daffodils, I'm told. Okay? He's inside the daffodil. He won't leave it. It's reportedly that Darwin had to wait 2 hours before he exited from the daffodil when Darwin came to his door, when he was very upset by John Ruskin said, Darwin, part of what you see is correct, but I actually see that everything's based on a cooperative model. And Darwin got upset. But there wasn't anybody else that Darwin could talk about this idea with other than John Ruskin. Let's go on. Here he is. So who was John Ruskin? Because he's given us some very powerful new ideas about entering into place. And when he built Brantwood outside Coniston Lake, he was very well aware that the place had potency, and that the mountain that he looked at every morning was a kind of signature and a kind of lodestone, a point of orientation, not just physically, but inwardly, within his soul. And he said it's all about seeing. And he was very interested in using the power of seeing to see beyond, to see the whole and build the part back into the whole. The greatest thing a human soul ever does in this world is to see something and tell what it saw in a plain way. Hundreds of people can talk for one who can think. But thousands can think for one who can see. To see clearly is poetry, prophecy, religion, all in one. See, he's a cosmologist. He knows how to put it all back together again. And he's dipping from the same source that Steiner did. It's very clear. And yet, of course, we know that Rudolf Steiner was able to take it into a spiritual scientific idiom. Steiner could talk about Michael, Ruskin could talk about St. George. And he set up St. George's Trust, this is interesting, in 1878, 1 year before what Rudolf Steiner calls the beginning of the Michael Age. But he called it St. George because he felt that the dragon had to be killed, not something that you have to incorporate within yourself. So he was into the image of the dragon being that of the industrial monoliths of Victorian England, this factory being one of them. He did not like to see the division of labor and the handcraftsmen going into submission on behalf of individual personalized wealth. In fact, Proust said it was amazing that Ruskin did not get hanged, because what he was saying was the disestablishment of the whole industrial financial model. And if you look at Unto This Last, which was written in 1860, you'll see the precursors of the threefold social order. It's all there. When Gandhi read it, he said, aha. When Tolstoy read it, he said, aha, I've got it. And in fact, when Gandhi got hold of that book that John Ruskin wrote, which is that money has to go through the image of nature. So we have to contemplate the plant, and what we see is that money has to be rooted. It then has to grow out of itself. It has to create leaves. It has to create a flower. Then it has to go to seed, and then it's in abundance. But if you take money, as we're doing, like the Dutch did when they did their harvesting of the tulips, bulb from bulb, it collapses. It destroys society. It's 1860. We've got a lot to owe this guy. Let's go on. So, what I'm very interested in is when I go on a farm walk in a biodynamic context. And I often get very animated at this idea of a farm walk, because what I'm interested in is to see how the farmer can start to convey to me the idea of this farm individuality, because this is very, very powerful. And in a way, all the ancient clairvoyant cultures understood that they could, through their awareness, organize the invisible landscape and see that the physical landscape was inexhaustibly connected together. They were one of the other. So when I go onto a biodynamic farm and I'm given a farm walk, I'm very interested to see how the farmer describes the totality of the place. And yet, when I finish, I'm aware that there isn't completely a method behind it. And so my challenge to the farmers and the gardeners, and that it goes to the Ruskin Mill staff as well, is we need to be more conscious about how we describe what it is that the place has, and how the individuality of the farm is what Oliver was trying to describe, which is that it is a development in which cohesion, out of the perception of the farmer, that person is able to create something entirely new that doesn't live in the natural world. Biodynamics may be considered the interaction between the natural world, universe, and human consciousness. This is the big one. Nature changes how it acts. It makes nature unnatural. Dennis Klozak. Now, when I talk to my green friends, they go, oh, ho, ho. What do you mean, Angus? This is supremacy again, isn't it? You're actually saying it's not good enough. I'm saying, no, I think there's an opportunity to enter the being of the place and the processes in which they, and this is the difficult one, they may fulfill themselves in relationship to one another. I lose them. Now, back to supremacy, Angus. So how do I bridge that gap? Because that's a real issue. Well, I think we have to go to the artists, the poets, and the painters. And we're going to have to use imagination. And we're going to have to trial things out. Because if we can't take the scientific idiom, which we're in, and converse with it, we're in a problem. Now, I hope Peter Van Fleet doesn't mind this. I know Peter can do that when he does his step-by-step biodynamic trainings. Ask him about it. So, the quality of consciousness may act as transformation for the natural world. We have the power, as in GM, to recreate nature. With a BD, agricultural individuality imagination, we may gain permission to create that which is yet to be created. And this is it, a new imaginable power. But not based on the Francis Bacon one, but allowing the components, when they come together in relationship through consciousness, we can create something new that has not yet been created. Well, if you've got the young people that we've got in your hands, do you know what? You've got to immerse them in something so evolutic, so powerful, that has life at its very core, because they're bereft of life. They've been spliced apart in every single area. So, as Oliver said, the biodynamic farm is a principle in which each component is recreated through conscious relationship. And I'm saying, and in place, please. Owen Barfield said, I go into the natural world as a participatory observer rather than a spectator observer, to become a seer, to have imaginations. Owen Barfield called this a new participatory consciousness. Now, I know you know this. The thing is, what we've tried to do at Ruskin Mill is to put it into action and find out how you draw that new insight into pedagogy and business. Let's go on. So, who trained me? Well, it was Margaret Culkin, the late Margaret Culkin. She was a genius when you were in her workshops. I went to the botanical gardens in Edinburgh, and she took me through the blackberry. And she said, look, it lands there, Aonghus. And I said, well, yes. She said, well, where does it go then? I said, oh, it disappears underground. She said, oh, yes, good. Does it come up? I said, yes. And it bounces again, and it bounces again. And she took me down this path, and I suddenly realized that I was going through a series of sleep experiences. And I said, is that a kind of mini-death, Margaret? And I said, I don't answer questions like that, but I'll leave it to you. And the answer is, that is what I experienced. That this was a continuum in the blackberry, fruiting, flowering, fruiting, dying, flowering, fruiting, dying. It was like a kind of continuum of one's life. And she got me to think and see something in the place that I wouldn't have had access to. So, we need to thank her. And Simon Reeks have kind of done a sevenfold. This is her sevenfold process, but with my language. And what is the first thing? Collecting the information, mineral, plant, animal, and human. And it's quite objective. So this is where the farm walk can become a little bit more focused. And you go down and say, okay, what is the geology? What's the chemistry? What is the water? How deep is the limestone? Is it fractured? Where are the springs? Where's the clay? Do you have a profile? Why are the little cottages built just 20 feet below the spring line? And suddenly, everything opens up. Now, what is the relationship of the beechwood to the loamy clay? And it goes on. What are the boundaries between the ancient woodlands? How old do they go back? Oh, there's a small leaf lime. Well, that is a post-glacial event. It's still there, struggling. But a small leaf lime is a post-glacial event. So the woods have actually been semi-cultivated, managed, without obliteration, since the Ice Age. What? So suddenly we're going back into the periglacial periods, and we're building up this vertical timeline of understanding. And do you not know that when you do that, you become the genus loci of the community, because you have prior knowing before things happen. You get insight. You can preempt. You can be in the kind of mode of the operation of what's happening in your community. And you can begin to see something. And then you can start to look into the animals and the cohabitation of animals. And then you can actually look at who's done what to whom in the community. Who's violated the tax man? Darlington, there's a football stadium that was done on a VAT fraud. It's the signature building of the town. And everybody won't talk about it because they're ashamed of it. I think that's shocking. But it exists. The guy was banged up for it. But every Saturday, the whole community goes to this complex situation. It's important to know that. And certainly in Ruskin Mill, and certainly in Stourbridge, we need to know this. Because this building here, through human interaction, was a very tricky building. We'll talk about it in a minute. So, I'm only going to take you through 4 stages in stage 1. I'm not going to do stage 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Just give you the first step of how you enter the place with a structure. Let's go on. Till van der Voort led a wonderful genus loci walk on stage 1 to discover the 4 stages. And there was nowhere better than to go down the river Kolbeck and to look at the cliffs, the stones, the conglomerates, the flow of water, the verdant life. And there he is leading the Genus Loci audit walk for Clervaux Trust. What's interesting about that, it's now hosting a new special needs garden school. The garden that he created from this walk is now going to become a school. When I say a school, I really mean it. The classrooms are his beds of plants, herbs, ... We're not putting a school in a garden. The garden is the school. It's quite tricky. Ofsted are having a problem with it, but we'll get there. Okay, let's go on. So how do we do this? Well, our inspirer is Goethe. Because we have to go back and say, so he saw that we could enter a situation in which we could look at ourselves as participants in the event. Isis Brooks, who did a module at Lancaster University, a master's module, very short, and it doesn't exist anymore, but it was absolutely brilliant. She called it the capacity to have intersubjective verification, where you go into place, you go into the plant, you appreciate the animal, you look at the deeds and the double of what human beings have done, and you hold judgment. In such a way that the team itself begins to corroborate the insight. When we did it ourselves in one of the preparations several years ago at Ruskin Mill, the question was, how do we understand dandelionness? Not the dandelion. Intersubjective verification was this way in which we entered the being of that presence of the plant. And it does mean big scientific and imaginative. So if we go, I should have talked about really the mineral world. It could be limestone. But Rudolf Steiner says something very interesting about the mineral world. And I have this as my guide to get into the mineral world. It's the area that I enjoy most, going into the rocks. The perception of the inner earth and the celestial heavens in their relationship to the four members of the human being. If the human being on earth would have a gift for imaginative knowledge, he would know that his being is connected with the metallic nature of the earth. So this is my little vignette of getting in. Why? Because this is my pathway to get down, down, down. And what was interesting is that I use this every time we set up a new project. So when I got to Sheffield, of course, it's metals. The city has access to 5 metals. And they're actually in the area, except gold. Silver can be found, iron, copper, tin. They're all within the periphery of Sheffield. And so the whole lineage of the city and that of human beings and the whole medical course actually come within that insight. So by going into the rocks of the earth and understanding the minerals and what kind of mineral component there is in limestone, if I'm in Ruskin Mill rather than Stow-on-the-Wold, 10% in Stow-on-the-Wold, 5% at Ruskin Mill. I get a whole new entry into maybe why things are as they are. Let's go on. And we're going to fill this vessel, the plant world. So we do an audit on the plants, the water, the influences of light and warmth, and we fill this vessel of pragmatic knowledge. Let's go on. And that of the animals. The soul quality. You know, it's really interesting to see the relationship of Cotswold stone walls to that of sheep, because the Cotswold stone waller had to be very, very specific in how they built those walls, because they were to keep sheep in, not cows, when they first started. And when the Cistercians came around, they had something very interesting. They discovered that the fieldstone wasn't only for the walls, and they were tiny, and that they could be very compacted to actually divide up legal plots, but they really acted as a barrier for the sheep. And the more stones they took off and built their walls, the richer the soil and the grass became, to the point where they could trade their wool to the Venetian, Genoese, Siena armies in Italy. So the wealth of England came off the back of the sheep, and it was the Cistercians who understood how to do field management and grow pasture. And we have an interesting relationship around Ruskin Mill when we go to the top of the hills between Tetbury, where our good prince lives, is that there's a high propensity of pasture and grazing that was originally embedded by the Cistercians. And they're all sort of converting, bit by bit, either into biodynamics or organic. And I can only conclude that there's a very careful, an interesting relationship in the genus loci of the Gloucestershire area and Nailsworth and Tetbury with the Cistercians and a conversation with biodynamics. And that goes into the human world. Let's go to the human world. And we need to find the influence of the double, because that becomes a task. And when you apply that here, the double becomes very clear. As the division of labor, where monetarization of hand skill time was put under profit, the level of subjugation in which the glass workers in this very hall underwent created the problems that even the glass house is dealing with today. And I'll give you an interesting insight. So having done this and got into cutting glass, this is before we bought this place, and done some glass blowing, I realized that every ADHD boy would love glass blowing. You can see why. Because he's in perpetual movement. And the glass is moving him, her. And you know what? The ADHD boys and girls like being moved. It's quite a lot of effort to move themselves. So if there's an external authority to move them in blowing glass, they'll do it. Would the Asperger do that? You must be joking. They like doing cut, 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 cut. And then I realized that we had two iconic craft activities that were synonymous with this area that worked either with the ADHD boys and girls or the Asperger boys and girls. And that I could hold their attention for hours as we then had conversations about how the prescription of glass cutting and glass blowing, which is what was on the agenda, can do the rehealing. It is the medicine. But not under the division of labor through this economic weapon, which had created the subjugation in vast communities in the Black Country that Oliver talked about. Because each motoric activity, if it's under the division of labor and money, just as Ruskin saw and Rudolf Steiner saw through his threefold social order, creates exclusion, isolation, ADHD, Asperger's. It just goes on. You can see it following through. But if you can isolate the activity and look at the movement, it's regenerative. So the irony was that the very thing that had created the problems, when you then put a new spiritual insight on, which is what is the spirit of the movement in making a wine glass? What kind of authority does the glass require the student to perform? Well, if you then go back to Koenig and his book on being human, you'll see that it's all about spatial coordination. Right, left, front, back, up and down. Get those young people to perform movements of authority in which the activity is for the other. Because they're not the designers, they're only the makers. They're performing the requests of the social community, called a wine glass. And there you have the renewal of what was dead as a corpse living again through the genus loci. See the double and see its solution. That is the task. Give those young people back the very thing their grandparents were so good at, but not under economic constraint. Let's go on. So it took some time, but this became it. This is our business model. I don't show it to the commissioners, of course, but that's it. And you put that into action in care plans, education plans. But at heart, it is the biodynamic ecology with the practical skills curriculum. It's about 40 to 50% of all the students' timetable when they first come, even higher. So that's the business model. And each signature craft can be found in the various animals, plants, and minerals of any area. So you then go and find the signature craft, and the signature craft becomes the medicine. But in a therapeutic understanding. How do we know that? Well, I'll give you one more challenge. You do need to know something about Rudolf Steiner's pedagogy, the 12 senses. Because which craft does which sense is important to know. So you're obliged, if you go down this road, of reanimating the thing that killed the community, that then can renew the community out of the genus loci, to understand what craft is working into which movement of the young people. So the curriculum is here. It's not in the Weimar recession. Now that was naughty, but that's actually, I stick to that. Let's go on. So, this is the room. Can you see it? The multi-pot, as it's called, on the right-hand side, is right there. The multi-pot. Can you see that? I'm showing you a picture of what it was like in 2000, the day I bought it. Okay? Hard deal. I had to go up to Stoke. The CEO was nearly in tears. The share price was crashing. I arrived just at the right time. And I said, I'm going to give you £406,000. And he said, I want a bit more. And I said, how much more? And he couldn't wait to shake my hands. It was all done on a handshake. And I heard at the end of that day that the share price had even crashed more. So had I waited another few hours, I might have even got it cheaper. Who knows? So I got the edge of that kind of conundrum, because they bought this site to make crystal glass for the potteries, and so the table set of a kind of middle class international family. I think that's really what he said. And they were losing this. But, all potential. So, that afternoon, or maybe the next day, having done my genus loci audit to a certain extent, I then thought, eurythmy. What's eurythmy doing? What's the connection between the ballerina of the glassmaker on this site for 150 to 200 years, making glass, the most agile and beautiful glass that was ever made in the world, because it went on to the shipping lines and didn't go to the Titanic. I did discover that. That was the factory down the road, and they were all fighting each other to get the contract. So where are those movements? Where are those potentials that can come back? And So putting glass into the curriculum of the students out of the spirit of this place, and in a way giving it back into the community, also needed another piece. It's a bit like the difference between organic and biodynamic. I was doing organic agriculture at that point, kind of recycling the nutrient, making it healthy, giving it back into the hands of those young people. But what was Maren and Shana doing in the Eurythmy school down the road, where they were in a little bit of difficulty? They were doing an involutic process of movement. Their movement did not come from the physical world, but it came from the etheric world and the astral world, in which the ego was the organ of cooperation. Now, I could more or less say something similar about glass blowing. But what I also knew is that the script of eurythmy can't be found entirely in the physical world. So I said, imagine a marriage of the ballerina of the glassmaker and the eurythmist. So I invited them and I said, can you imagine that we might be able to perform in here? And you know, they were so wise and they were so open and they were so creative. They said, well, let's do this. So they're here, have been. And what's interesting is that the students can go from doing glass cutting and glass blowing to then sitting down, and this is a big deal, for 20 minutes to watch a eurythmy performance about once every 6 weeks. Now you say, is that an achievement? Let me tell you, it's massive. And I'm not sure of the alchemy, but it works. Let's go on. So I want to do something very quickly. So we're in the land of Cain in the Black Country. Cain violated. He created something, tried to sell it on to the god, wasn't recognized because it was made by the hand of man. Abel took nature, gave it, and God saw that it was divine. And out of jealousy, the dispute took place. Do you know we're still in that dispute? Oliver described it beautifully. We're on the edge of 3 million people in the eastern direction, and we're on the edge of nearly an empty space where people don't want to go for, really, except unless they're really entrepreneurial and they want to have a kind of community, unless they want to live in this quite sparse community. But also, the land has been captured to the west of this place. In fact, we had to buy a horse farm. There was nothing available, and there's hardly been anything available since then, because it's all done through hereditary. And the divinity of what those individuals hold on to, and I've met some of them, it's very powerful. Those forces under the ground in the genus loci of their land ownership shape their world. And it's not very conscious. And they hold on for dear life. And it's tenacious. And the job is to create a succession of inheritance. So I met that in Clairvaux, 800 years. Bill Chater told me he can trace back his farm. And I thought I was pretty astute at having a 100-year land management policy. And I met this whole new world. And they're holding on to this kind of divine idea of the natural order of nature. And here, in the Black Country, all let rip. I can take as much clay out of the ground. In fact, I took so much there was no more left for the crucibles of the glass pots to melt the glass in. I had to get it from outside. I took all the working sand. There was none left. I had to get it from outside. And it goes on. But the coal was in the street. That's the genus loci. Sand, clay, coal, glass. And Cain, succession is Hiram. It's about penetrating matter, going down, going down. And you'll see a statue of Hiram in the car park. There's reason for that. Because everything I've studied about Hiram tells me that he was in a kind of the adolescent phase of human development. He says, yes, let's try it out. And when it goes wrong, we'll have another go and another go and another go until we get it right. He's the champion of human freedom. And on the other hand, we've got the able Solomon, Plato, Kepler, where divinity is maintained, do not disturb the status quo. And in the end, I'll win because I have the capacity to know what it is you do. It's academia. And we have this slightly treacherous relationship between those who do things with their hands being studied by those who don't do anything with their hands. It's called the grammar school and the secondary model. And it's functionalized in utter division. And we're still in that paradigm. We're trying to get out of it, but it's tricky. And so practitioner communities such as this, who don't observe themselves in action, we saw that Goethe learned to do that, showed us how to do it. We call it in England action research. If action research doesn't come into the process of farming, gardening, pottery, storytelling, where there's resistance into the world for transformation, others will do it for you and you lose your autonomy because you become subject to other people's perception and interpretation of what you do. Hence the essential ingredient of doing research in practice. And we get here something called Goethe, Ruskin, and morphology. So we are, in a way, whether we're farmers or industrialists or practitioners or craftsmen, if we don't go back to the understanding the source of your clay or your wood, you're going to be a victim because you won't know what it is you really do and how you do it. And you might say, well, I trust my neighbor. He digs the clay. Yeah, that's fine. But if you haven't done it, be careful. Because when he gives you bad clay, you won't know, potentially. You see my point. So we're here. The genus loci is the capacity to be able to bring this division back into a healing relationship. You can call it the Rosicrucian movement. You can call it anthroposophy. You can call it, Ken Wilber said, interdependent practitioner, new learning universities and communities worldwide. Absolutely beautiful. Things come back together. Let's go on. And so I tried this out. Because this was a derelict place. And I had an issue about the amount of, you see, this is how far we've gone on. There were still televisions in 2000. Students arrived in September with their TVs, not their flat screens. And I had an apartment above them, and I noticed that they were watching gratuitous Hollywood violence until about 2 in the morning. I went down and knocked on the door, and I said, look, give me permission. Give me a control switch where I can flick it at least at 12:30, 1 o'clock, and it'll just go dead. I go, boom. And I said, come on, you get up in the morning, you can't get breakfast, you're grumpy, da-da-da. And they said, well, let's try it out. And I couldn't believe it. So I had this power switch, not far from my bed. 1:30, click, boom. Everything but the fridge went black. And they agreed. And I thought, do you know what? Let's do the next thing. I'm going to give them a cathode ray tube, and we're going to smash it up in the glass house. And the cathode ray tube is an interesting corollary, because in the back of the cathode ray tube, you'll see at this section, the rear funnel, there's 23% lead. At that time, these were being land buried, landfill, thank you. And the lead was leaching out of the glass and going into the groundwater. But I had another interest. I wanted to see whether we could transform this idea. How do we get the lead out of the glass? Now, Roger Pauli's just turned up. He's disappeared again. And without him, and I have to fully acknowledge this, we probably wouldn't have got this glass place. Because he showed me who to go to at Stoke-on-Trent to do the deal. He wasn't in the room when I did the deal. He was somewhere else, but he did phone me up pretty quick and said, "Did you get it?" And I said, "Yes, thank you, Roger." And then I said, "Can you actually take this lead out of the glass?" And he said, "Well, why don't we have a go?" So we got all these cathode tubes, brought them in, started breaking them up, and there's a very interesting story. We did. Let's go through it quickly. Next one. Oh, I should say this. So what's going on? This is the profile of our new students. Look at that. And it's relentless. 1 in 59 in the US. Now, I looked on the internet. I can't find a graph like this in the UK. And I'm suspicious. And only 18 states in the US of 52 monitor this. So this is only from 18 states. There are states that won't even look at it. But I do know in California it's now 1 in 54. I mean, that's billions of pounds worth of ineffective collaboration. Let's go on. So that's the background. Here he is, incredible young man. High charge ADHD. Bright. Red-headed. Angry. Dum, pchoo, dum, pchoo. And it was like a kind of conveyor belt, you know? He just broke them up. Went into a crusher. Went into a furnace. He retrieved all the copper. He melted it all down. He took the plastics out. He even came to me and said, "My dad does work in the third world, Aonghus. Could we turn the plastics of the covers of the TVs into protractors and rulers for the children in Africa?" No, we didn't get there. But do you see what I mean? These young boys are entrepreneurs. Let's go on. Here's Roger. He's looking into the furnace. This is the furnace. The glass was broken up, crushed, put in, and I have to say that he said, "Look, I meditate on the problem, Aonghus, and I've discovered it's not a chemical problem, it's a mechanical problem." And I go, "Ooh." So we got a mechanical problem to solve. And you could see that inside this enclosed space, because he put his attention and became the lead and the glass. Think about it. We have to put our attention into the students, and we have to actually become the student. And we have to see what ails thee. So he did it with an industrial process. We do it in a pedagogical therapeutic process with our students. It's the same thing. It's a form of spiritual incubation into something you can't fully see, because the human being is very hidden. But if you look carefully, you can see that there are signatures of what shows to be problematic, particularly in the physical body. And this was a physical mechanical problem. Let's go on. Oh no, well here we are. Here's the lead. Here's the lead-free glass. The lead-free glass then went to this young man, Matthew Lucas. He won't mind me mentioning this. And he started making objects, domestic objects, out of the clean industrial glass. Didn't stop there. That's the back end of the cathode ray tube. Let's go forward. So, flow forms. I'm a great admirer of John Wilkes. And he asked me in 1983 to solve him on a problem of casting them. And I did so. And actually, ever since then, we've been making flow forms. And the students love making flow forms. So the genus loci of the glasshouse started to register the fact that it needed forgiveness and redemption from the brutality of the financial system that drove the production process. How do we go from intellect and will into the heart? That's what became clear. And that was done as collaborative. That's not Angus Gordon. Because we went through this process of saying, let's find the heart. This is what turned out. Some people don't realize that flow forms, although John can be credited for it, you can find them in the Colorado sandstone. Let's go on. And here we are. We took the front, got them industrially jet cut, slumped them in a former. Two of them together look like a pair of lungs. So we got quite close to the heart, breathing. So when you go outside, and here's the story, you'll see these having been put together by students. Let's go on. Here we are. Took 10 years of moving, fuss, money. Is this the right thing? Angus, you're intimidating people because they all watch television. I say, I'm not interested. I'm interested in the students resolving the gratuitous violence from Hollywood with sublight, with sunlight. We want the genus loci to get through the industrial mess and illuminate. Yeah, got 5 minutes. The double. The double is what has not been resolved, where an event, a community event may have taken place that haunts subconsciously or consciously the community. If you think of Theseus and Ariadne, yeah? So the Minotaur was eating the 9 most perfect warriors of the Athenian army every year, I think. And so there is this blight on the community. There's a blight that is hidden. It's like the trauma of the students is in the muscle. Where is the trauma of the community? Find it. Let's name it. Let's do something with it. Because if you go through the genus loci in the human world, you will find it. You'll even find it in Ruskin Mill. You will find it in a Waldorf school. This might be interesting. When I did this activity in 2003 in the Shining Mountain, Colorado school, with David Mitchell, he said, "We've got a problem, Angus. Every Thursday evening, the staff fight each other." I go, "Well, that's pretty common." He said, "But they do it rather well here." So we did the genus loci. And what we discovered is that there's a little ravine just behind the school. And 100 years ago, the young adolescent boys were trained to do something called coup. They had to follow the buffalo, slap the buffalo on the side, and chuck it over the ravine. And they killed it. And David said, "Wow, we all play coup. We got to stop it." So he went back. He showed them that they were all playing coup every Thursday evening. They stopped it. The school flourished. There was the double. It was written in as a kind of pathology, you could call it in the astral, that was systemic, that was unconscious, and that we follow things through. So the genus loci is also part of revealing where the wound is. so that you may name it. I mean, even naming it is significant. Never mind trying to do something about it. But as you know, when you can name something that is, implicit, until you can name it, you can't do anything with it. So that's what I mean by the double. So the Asperger operates fundamentally, I'm now doing a characterization of it, from about here up. Here, highly cognizant, incredibly skilled, conscious of their situation in that moment. But it's not relational. So in a way, I could be accused of aiding and abetting the condition by going down onto the grinding wheel and just doing this motion. However, what the Asperger didn't bargain for is that there's an outcome from this, which is that as I make my beautiful cut glass vase, when somebody sees it, they're going to go, Daniel, that's beautiful. Did you do it? And Daniel hardly knows how to say yes. So he's suddenly in this direct relationship with his mother or dad or the social worker, where he's having to account for the fact that he's done something beautiful and he has to accept a reward of generosity from the other human being. And of course, I knew that. So what you develop as a result of that is the ability to have to accept the idea of appreciation, which is what they don't want, because there's no legitimate way of accepting that reward or that generosity. But when you've done something in the world, it can't be denied. And what's even more remarkable, the glass vase carried on going through the domestic houses and the extended family. And everybody said, God, Daniel, did you do that? Do you see? There's a multiplier effect. So in the end, he's surrounded by some remarkable new levels of appreciation for having actually created something as a glass cut vase. Because he's somebody who generally likes to be focused on their own, it works. But that doesn't necessarily do the recovery route into relationships. But the glass cut on the vase did. I think that's it. Good.